Welcome to a new episode of Overlap, in which we are joining forces to have this conversation from across the world. My name is Belén de los Santos here from Cuba, from teleSUR, and with me is Tianshan from China Academy, hoping to have a great conversation tonight. So thank you so much for joining us, Tianshan.
Hi, Belén. I'm Tianchen, and thanks for having me today.
Of course, and we are getting into one topic today that has, well, it started in South America, but it has sparked interest across the world, really, and that is the government of the so-called anarcho-capitalist Javier Milei in Argentina. It's been all over the news. It made all the headlines ever since 2023, and of course, we continue to analyze it, and it really sparked interest across the world because of the impact that it's having, not only in its country, but also of the repercussions it could have on other countries as well. And also some are looking at it as a possible just repercussions across the world of similar models. So just to get off the bat, we are 2 years into that Javier Milei government in Argentina. We'll start thinking into a little bit of what were the main policies and also what are the main impacts that are happening in the country and the region. But Tianjian, how well does China know the Javier Milei phenomenon?
Okay, he is the superstar, I would say. He is definitely a big political star here in China, and I believe maybe everywhere. And all we can say, he's a very important political influencer, second only to Trump. Maybe he draws the level of attention similar to Zelensky. But it's definitely not like everyone in China likes him or hate him, but he's controversial, and the level of attention he draws here is extremely high. His image and his speech and his policy have all left a strong impression on Chinese audience. I think he's kind of like Trump because Milei is also considered an outsider to his own country's political system, but his political career is even more legendary than Trump. Trump is a billionaire anyway, so he can afford his campaign, at least on the very beginning stage. But Milei, I feel like he started from nothing. He had zero political capital, so he started everything from scratch, but he knows so well how to make full use of everything in his toolkit, like his rock and roll and his hairstyle, the way he's speaking, and his chainsaw, and even his little jackets. So everything, all of these like help him to build traction quickly among the global audience as well as the Chinese audience. And I can remember Milei had a lot of viral moments. The one I like the most, I believe you are pretty familiar with that, is the video where he's crossing out all the ministries of the Argentina's government, and he's shouting like Ministry of Education, every era, every era. And how strong is that even for us, like who don't understand Spanish, and how can we not remember that? All of this is has sparked the most hot discussion over him here in Chinese internet. And at the same time, I think Chinese audience are very curious about how Argentina is doing right now. There is one of the top channels here called 视频道. Their team actually went to Argentina last year, and they filmed a documentary about Argentina under Milei. And we try to share the video with you before this dialogue, but there isn't a free link because it's a paid members only content. So yet it has already received over 5 million views on Chinese internet, which means on one single Chinese social media platform, over 5 million Chinese people have paid to watch a documentary about Argentina, about Milei. So that's how much visibility Milei has drawn and Argentina has drawn here in China. So I hope this gets you the basic idea about his visibility here.
Of course, and it is so interesting. And of course, being from a country from the global south where the news tend to go the other way around, this phenomenon has struck a chord, definitely. Even among his detractors, this idea of, well, our president is well known across the world, and like top leaders who in other cases may not even know exactly where the country is located in South America, because you know that many northern countries, I'm thinking about the United States and Europe, get their global south confused sometimes. And they were tweeting him out and they were like taking pictures with him. And there's a sort of like phenomenon of we are well known, that definitely said something. Of course, many analysts and are saying like, well, okay, but well known for what? And that's something to understand and to analyze. I think that it's interesting, like just going back to when he was elected, to understand that a lot of what you were mentioning played an important role. This controversial images and his appearance in TV shows and social networks. No, you were talking about some of the viral videos that were very much linked to very controversial positions on the government and on like his government actions, right? So this idea of drastical cuts and speaking broadly against social justice. He was very well known for another viral video saying that social justice was a crime and it was stealing, and the only way of, like, the only free way of honoring freedom and independence was absolute capitalism. So he had like this big ideas that really came across in many instances causing a lot of anger, a lot of indignation on a population. Argentina comes from a great tradition of popular organizations, social movements, for a long time being very proud of, even if it continues to be a very unequal country. It has a lot of the trends that, sadly, a lot of the global south has. Free public education was always very important. A free health system was always very important. So these ideas were so controversial and were hitting a lot of like spots. But of course, at a time of economic uncertainty, they resonated with parts of the population because they seem to give like clear solutions or quote unquote like easy solutions. Then we need to see if they are actually solutions and what impact they are having. But at that time when people need answers, that definitely said something. And as you were saying, it is true that he came from outside the political spectrum, right? So from outside the two most well-established parties that had been alternating power for the past decades. And when we are thinking about why Milei comes to power, we need to understand that at that time, two things were happening. Inflation was the biggest problem that the economy was facing, and it was taking a toll. Every part of the population was really suffering from just the level of uncertainty that means. Not only the highest inflation in the world, we were talking about over 200% year-on-year inflation. We Argentinians, year after year, got a little bit used to those high numbers, but across the world, those were numbers that are not even thought of. And also that the alternation for the past decade before Milei, the established political parties had alternated and had not been able to solve that underlying problem. So people were really coming from a sense of failure from the political structures that had not been able to meet those demands. So I think that Milei really understood that lack, that vacuum of confidence, and really used that in his favor. Of course, And just one thing before going back to you, I think that one interesting thing to keep in mind is it's okay, and of course it's correct to say that he comes from outside that political spectrum. He really does come from, quote unquote, like nothing in terms of political backing. But as he gained momentum, a lot of very big interests lined up behind him. Not necessarily because he was their candidate, but because they saw and they continue to see Milei as a way of opening up a market, as a way of opening up what used to be regulations that, for example, hindered foreign investment in a predatory way, really, that part of the North has been seeking in South America. And Milei, with his speaking of like getting rid of all regulations and getting rid of all frontiers, and you can take all the resources as long as you come and invest here, and will control nothing in terms of who gets those earnings, or if that is reinvested in the country, or if that is taken away. That was really appealing to a sector of the national elite that is always profiting from that, and also to a sector of the international elite. Like, we do not need to forget that, for example, Elon Musk was one to always hype up Milei, and Milei was really proud of this. Like, Elon Musk wants to take my picture and it's tweeting me out. So this, we really need to keep it in mind, that even though he comes from nowhere, that doesn't mean that at that moment and today still, there are not like big powers backing him up, because they strategically see him as a way to enforce those interests. And that is sort of like the role he's playing. There's been a lot of talk in terms of the comparison between Milei and Trump, right? How have you perceived that from your side? I see that from the outside, people tend to see the similarities, basically. Is that the case from China?
I think so. I totally agree with you. The point you just brought up. It looks like at the beginning, Milei and Trump was an outsider, and they all started from a lower place in terms of the establishment political structure. But once they are in power and everything's different, and they are so tied to this interest group, and they used to be maybe a symbol of defiance against a backdrop of maybe it's rampant inflation in Argentina, and maybe it can be some other kind of economic difficulties in the United States. But everything changed once they are in the office. I totally agree with that point. So that's maybe the biggest similarity between Milei and Trump. But I was wondering, because Trump has been in the office in almost 1 year, more than half a year, and Milei has been in the office for almost 2 years. So I feel like they are kind of have a similar presidential style. And there's an old saying in China called 雷声大雨点小, which means like very loud thunder but only little rain. So I don't know if I got the news and data right, and correct me if I'm wrong. So I feel like Milei and Trump, they had a lot of like ambitions before, and especially during their presidential campaign, and they had a lot of the big goals, especially like Milei. For example, Milei, he talked about all these kind of things. He's gonna to abolish the central bank, and he's gonna to open up all these markets, no tariffs and everything. And I remember all his crazy ideas about the whole package of privatization, marketization, and liberalization. But from what I read about some analysis of Argentina's current situation, it looks like Milei didn't execute most of his ambitions he claimed to do before. So that's where I'm most curious about. It's like, to what extent is Milei is carrying out these liberalization measures? Because from what I see from Trump, and Trump said that he's going to do this, he's going to do that, and he's going to wage a tariff war against the world. But actually now we are in a post-period. The U.S. trade war is in a post-period, and everything is posted till August last time, and it gets postponed forever. And now it's in the dealing process with every country, and especially at the beginning, we thought that the trade war is against China, but for now, there's nearly zero process in the trade war between China and the U.S. So how is Milei doing? Is he kind of delivering his promises? To what extent?
So that is really interesting. And I think that, of course, people continue to ask themselves that question every day, and analysts as well, economists as well. Well, you were saying it, right? So out of the blue, so unexpected. I think that part, Trump and Milei have it in common. They bet on confusion. They bet on chaos. Even this idea of doing like this resounding statements. I'm going to change everything overnight. I'm going to do. And that creates a permanent state of alert. And also there's such unexpected promises. Milei was talking during his campaign of burning down the central bank. So everyone was like, "But what does that mean? And what will happen? But we have a dependent economy. But what about our currency?" So it becomes a permanent state of alert that really hinders more in-depth analysis and a serious analysis. And I think that is very much politically calculated, that people are just going after the last viral statement instead of just focusing on broader trends. The case of what you were mentioning, I was saying that is one of the aspects why people continue to ask themselves, to what extent has he delivered on those promises? So, of course, there are a lot of these big resounding promises that have completely disappeared after, or I don't know if completely disappeared, but have not been delivered on, and also have not returned to discourse after he became president. The destroying the central bank, for example, the complete over-the-night dollarization, for example, that he said was so easy to do, so easy to deliver, and that would solve all the problems magically. Again, very much in line to what we were saying before, the idea of delivering like short sentences, apparently easy solutions that the problem is that no one dared to do before, and that would solve everything overnight. Of course, not only those would have a lot of serious consequences that could not be solved overnight, but also they're very just from a practical standpoint, almost impossible to implement, at least not right away. For example, not even talking about dollarization, but Milei used to talk about just ending up all regulations on currency exchange. You know, that Argentina, as many other global South economies, but particularly because of its relationship to the US dollar and its relation to foreign market in particular, has a lot of struggles with currency exchange market. It's very dependent on those regulations. It's become very dependent on those regulations because the years of inflation, economic stability, and a lot of other factors have become it difficult to maintain its own currency, the Argentine peso, without its permanent relation to US dollar and the restraints that meet. Milei had always said he would end those regulations overnight, and the peso should be at whatever point it needed to be, and that would solve everything. And to this day, they only ended up regulations about a couple of months ago. So that was over a year into his government, a year in which he maintained a strict regulations. He fixed the level of the Argentine peso, something very different to what he said he was going to do. And even now, even if those regulations are not in place, there's a lot of debate in terms of how much he's spending to manipulate that exchange market, so intervening in that exchange market so that the national currency, the peso, does not go up in the air, because that would affect inflation, and inflation is the biggest target of Milei. That is, almost everyone is saying it. In other governments, it was in poverty, for example. In other governments, it was inequality. For Milei, his campaign was to beat inflation. So if inflation does not go down, if inflation for any reason, for example, because of the peso going up, if inflation goes up again, that would be a disaster for in terms of his own promises. So as you can see, the amount of which he could or not deliver was very much constrained by even his own promises, and of course the practical factors of implementing those things that sounded maybe to some sectors of society really appealing on a viral TikTok, but then meant a lot of different things in action. Now, even if he did not do those resounding promises, there are some things that were definitely applied. He talked about basically cutting all public spending, or as much as he could do. And we have seen a great deal of focus on cutting that public spending, shrinking the state agencies as much as he can. And that now cutting the public spending or achieving fiscal balance, so having more, having less expenditures in general, has translated to affecting certain sectors in particular. So pensioners have been among the most affected. Retirees and everything going to pensions have been the most affected. A great proportion of the public spending that he could reduce, it was taken from what should have gone to retired workers. That is one of the sectors of society that is mobilizing every week. It's become just a moment in the week. It's the Wednesday's demonstration in front of the Congress, because it has been one of the most targeted sectors of the population. Other areas such as public works in general, in terms of investment of infrastructure, has also dropped dramatically. And it has really affected the economic activity in general. But in terms of labor, the construction area in particular, then other sectors such as the scientific sector, that the past governments, both from center left to right perspective, had maintained in terms, or relatively maintained in terms of the need to build strategic knowledge and to continue betting on scientific development, even as in an industrial standpoint, that has been also very harshly affected. The scientists in general also are one of the sectors that have been demonstrating, well, not every week, but a lot lately. The health system has been on the news lately as well. So as you can see, all of these things that he promised he would do, a lot of the afueras from the viral video maybe did not translate exactly, but are having a great impact, is committed to shrinking that public spending. But that public spending does not mean having higher taxes on the highest income sectors of society, does not mean taking more revenue from the big exports from society. It even does not mean thinking strategically how to obtain more revenue from the potential like energy markets or anything to do with the natural resources, because that has been basically went up for grabs. All the legislation has gone into letting everyone come in, and I will put no regulations in terms of you having to give back to the country, to the government, or in terms of investment. Everything, all the spend cutting has come from lowering investment on those key sectors that are now driving a social unrest in terms of the retirees, the health system, the public education. Again, sectors that were historically very important to large parts of the population in Argentina for its historical just political life. And now we need to see what will happen in that sense. Will Milei be able to continue to retain that support, even if he is continuously hitting on the sectors that are then benefiting from that health system, from that education? How long will he be able to sustain that? Because that is easy to say when you're outside of power and you're saying that it's the political system that will pay the bills. It's the higher sectors that no one really knows who they are that will pay the bills. But when you come to reality, and who's paying the bills are the ones who are not making ends meet and who are having a much slower economy and job perspectives, then we need to see healthcare is going down and the education is going down. Then you need to see how that is going to be sustained over time, basically.
So sounds familiar to everything happened in the US right now. As you mentioned, like the pension cut off and everything in public education, in healthcare, in scientific research, all of this area by Trump. So it sounds very familiar. And I'm very curious about cause any shift in public opinion towards Milei, because I feel like if he just carry out these measures, it sounds like just like very classical neoliberal, conservative economic policies of this. Like it's not a new thing in Argentina. It's not a new thing in the world. So, but Milei rises because people saw him as an outsider, saw him as a reactionary, and if he just like did everything close to other labelists, like how can is that gonna to impact his approval rating or anything? Like is he gonna to have a still solid base of fans and of followers? How does that impact the Argentina society right now? Do you observe any shift on that?
Well, Tianchen, you have the best questions. You have the questions that any political analyst in Argentina would like to ask and answer, of course. That is definitely the question. And you know that this year we are in the just month before the legislative elections in Argentina. Those are the midterm elections.
Yeah.
Those are already taking place right now, but the main event at the national level will be in a couple of months. And that is the big question. Is all of this having an impact on that perspective that people had on Milei? How is that impacting, if it is at all? Definitely what we can say, there's no resolution in terms of this right now because it is all a little bit happening day to day. And also good enough to say that the surveys have become at least hard to follow in terms of the segments they're evaluating. For the past elections, they have not given concrete answers, and those answers had not related to the results in the election. So people are also a little bit skeptical nowadays about, okay, you can have a study showing one thing, showing another thing, but how is that really a testament of the general sentiment? But there are a couple of things to keep in mind, at least as clues to what may be happening. For example, there are a different amount of surveys indicating that even though there's a portion of society that backed Milei when they elected him, right? And there's a portion of society that even though they backed Milei when they elected him, they now disapprove of his measures. But he still retains an important portion of society saying that they approve of the government so far, even though that has been declining over the past month, and we could go over why that could be. However, many studies show that the portion of society that supports Milei does not necessarily equate to the portion of society that support all of those broad statements against public education, against the healthcare system, against, like, they do not support everything that he is saying. As time goes by, and as he continues to pull on those threads of hitting the most sensitive agencies related to healthcare, related to disability pensions, related to the retirees, and cannot deliver up and developing economy 2 years into his mandate, we should see like what will happen to those people. For example, a very recent study, one of the largest protests for the past weeks have been from Argentina's most important pediatric hospital, the Garrahan. It's been all over the news with the health workers and all the workers of the hospital, really, and a massive amount of the population demonstrating, because the doctors were saying that they were understaffed, that they were heavily underfunded, and they were losing the ability to provide service. And this is a public hospital that is very important and very sensible for the population, not only because it's a children's hospital, it's been very innovative, it's been so good in its quality that even though the health system in Argentina has a lot of problems and a portion of it is privatized, that children's hospital, being a public hospital, always continued to be a great reference to all sectors of society, because the harshest diseases affecting children were investigated and treated there. So, of course, that struck a very sensitive chord to the entire society. And studies show that even though a portion of the population supports Milei, an even higher portion, it was like up 78% of the population was strictly convinced that hospital had to be a priority and that the government had to do anything it takes and prioritize it in terms of funding and keep it running. So that means that an important sector of the population that is still backing Milei is actually very much against what is happening in that case. And if this translates to other similar scenarios, we are actually looking into a situation that will not easily, it will not be easy to translate it to electoral situations, and definitely into, for example, foreseeing if he could re-elect or not in 2 years. It's a complex situation. Even if he retains that support, that doesn't mean that the entire population wants these measures. So what will that mean in a couple of years? I think that is the main question to answer and to keep track on. Also, important to keep in mind that so far, no other sector of society seems to be able to capitalize on that discontent, because the entire political system appears to be just people are lacking confidence in general because not being able to deliver answers. So this is turning into a lack of participation. So, for example, we have all-time lows during these elections this year. So once again, Milei 2 years ago capitalized on that discontent, on that frustration, on that inability from the elected powers to deliver on those promises. If he, again, is not able to fulfill those expectations, what will happen to that discontent? Will maybe sectors of the organized popular organizations, social organizations, be able to propose a new horizon, a new answer back to those policies and fuel on that discontent? Maybe. Probably not in 1 month, but some analysts are looking at that in the long term. So maybe those are the variables of what is happening right now.
It's quite interesting talk about like how the voters think in Argentina, and that kind of mindset is pretty common, pretty typical in this capitalist two-party system. But Chinese people may find it kind of unfamiliar with that because it's quite special. Like the voters in Argentina, I feel like from what you just mentioned, they are forced to make a kind of binary decision. Like if they vote for Milei, it doesn't because they like Milei a lot. It's probably because they just want to remove the previous president. It's also the same thing happened in the United States. Like it's not like people like Trump. It's because people hate Biden. They hate Harris, they hate Obama or whatever, and they hate the whole deep state, the establishment. But if next time the Democrats gonna to win the next election, it's not because people like the Democrats. It's because people hate Trump so much. So I was thinking about it's if it's gonna to happen to Milei, and it looks like the no matter which party wins, it's always the ordinary people lose. It's kind of a fresh idea to Chinese people because what Chinese people are most concerned about is about how the policy are made and are these policies gonna to execute effectively? Are these policies gonna to improve social development and people's welfare? And we don't care a lot about like who's gonna to win this election, which party gonna to win. We don't have to worry about not spending any time and efforts. And we focus on how to deliver the promise, how to deliver the plans, for example, the 5-year economic plans. And by contrast, if you get an elected president in most of the Western countries, they always fail to deliver on their promises. Yeah, that's the major differences I want to bring about.
Of course, and it's so interesting to keep up this conversation because what you were pointing out definitely speaks to a moment in terms of the liberal political system of parts of the West that are, we see it repeated time and time again in different scenarios. Of course, not every political system is the same, but many in the West have this sort of alternation. Seems to be stuck at a moment in time in which, as you were saying, people are going from frustration to frustration, voting out of anger rather than looking for a viable horizon or voting with will or convinced that that is the political alternative. And that seems to be spiraling. And in that spiral of frustration, we see that from those edges, new things are emerging. Well, for the past years, in South America at least, there's an important sector of the far right emerging from those edges. We see it in Argentina, but we saw it before in Brazil. We see it in Chile. We see it in different sectors. Some of them got to power, some didn't. But we have radicalized movements, many linked to different forms of religious fundamentalisms, many linked to this idea of going back to some form of ultra conservatism in order to build a new horizon or a new way of social life. And that is definitely emerging. And we need to see that as a trend that is happening, even if they come to power or they are outside of power at the moment, that trend continues. Just as Trump emerged in the United States and he was out of power, but then that movement continued and he came back. The same thing we can see in Brazil, for example. The movement that had Bolsonaro as leadership is now an active actor of the Brazilian political life, even if it's not in power at the moment. And even if its main leader, Bolsonaro, is now in prison, we see that political activity is a new actor, and that is emerging. Well, there's other things to say in terms of what will happen. Will there be a new tendency, new organization from a leftist perspective to rival that new emergence? We're definitely at a transition moment. Of course, sectors, some countries that have completely different processes than the ones we're talking about have a lot on popular activity and organization and building from the ground up, and a lot of communal experiences. So interesting to follow in Venezuela. In Mexico as well, the process is it's very interesting. But definitely, as we're speaking of the southern region of the continent, there was that frustration that was spiraling sort of out of control. This far right is emerging in that context, and the social organizations that are searching for general well-being in terms of social equality, in terms of reducing inequalities, in terms of just improving the general way of living of the broader sectors of the population. They are still trying to see how they can organize in this new scenario. And some are very optimistic that given the right organization, this could be like a new movement, because people apparently looking for answers, and they were very fast to answer that call that was presented at viral TikToks from Milei, but that they could be as well enamored with other social proposals if presented to them. So there's an interesting scenario to continue, but definitely one that will have a lot of polarization, that will have a social struggle and political struggle at a new pace that we've been seeing in the past decades, definitely going into a new political momentum in general. And I'm speaking in South America, but I wanted to go back to something that you were saying regarding Trump, and we left it off there at some point of the conversation. I see this comparison being held all the time. And of course, I see that it comes from a couple of very interesting points, right? Bolsonaro, Milei, Trump, they are continuously even signaling themselves like, I'm the Trump from the South. Trump will say, I like that guy Milei down in Argentina. Like, he's like me, he's my friend. They will even mention the similarities themselves. And the similarities are clear. They come from the outside. They are breaking political norms or political structures. They are using a sort of radical speech to appeal to the masses. And that is making a real big impact and effect. But also looking forward, I think it's important to keep in mind that it is inherently different to think of these sort of leaders when Trump is saying America first, because he's defending a way of life in the West and capitalist United States, of which he is the center. So he is defending a model in which they are the number one beneficiaries. So it makes sense to have that protectionist discourse, and it makes sense that that will appeal to many sectors of society in terms of being felt, they feel that they are put first, right? But what does that mean for leaderships that are also saying, let's defend this Western capitalist model, when you are from a global South country that is actually just part of the elites are benefiting maybe from that structure, but the broader population is actually paying the toll of world capitalism that is the harshest on the global South. So there is like an inherent contradiction there that they're surfing really well right now, but I think it's something to continue looking at in terms of how that develops. I don't know how from China you're looking at these, because Milei's speech at Davos was like, it became very famous. Everyone was talking about it. And he was continuously talking about this. We are defending the West. Milei's speech at Davos was one of the most famous. It was headlines all over the world. And he was continuously speaking of this idea that anarcho-capitalism was for defending the West and its values, and this was a cultural battle, and that is what they are dealing with. Well, I continue to think that I truly don't know what it means for a global South president to be talking about defending West values that are better aligned with the United States, for example. I don't know how that speech is being perceived from China.
I think you just brought up the very fundamental differences between Trump and Milei because they come from completely different countries, different contexts. When Trump says American first, and so the first thing he's doing is to cut off ties with China because he wants to isolate China and and he persuade other countries to also cut off ties with China, and because that works best for American interest. But that's where I found interesting about Milei, because before Milei came in office and he said all these awful things about China, about communism, and he made many derogatory remarks about Chinese people, about Chinese leaders. But once he's in the office, he became the most pragmatic guy, and he didn't cut ties with China. If he do that, I would think he's the biggest fool in the world, because from the most pragmatic perspective, building a kind of friendly relation with China works best for the Argentina, because Argentina can use that to gain leverage in its dealing with the United States and to secure greater benefits. And also the relations between Argentina and China, it's actually a mutually beneficial relations. And because China is already one of the biggest trading partner of Argentina, I think also both exports and imports, and also there is broad cooperation opportunities for China and Argentina to work together in infrastructure, in high technology, and in agriculture, and in every major field. So if Argentina wants to make a great leap in economy, it cannot do so without China. So that's where I think Milei made a very smart choice by actually building a friendly relationship with China, especially in the trade and financial issues. I also heard about China and Argentina has signed a currency swap, and Argentina used that money to pay back to the IMF and the World Bank. So that actually the Chinese netizens jokingly described Milei as he was like chalk all against communism, all against China, but holding RMB firmly in his hand. From the Chinese view of points, I think the Chinese people, we do not hate dealing with pragmatic leaders as long as the relationship are mutually beneficial. China is willing to engage. Yeah, and I think that's where the future really lies for both countries.
I think you were making some very interesting points in terms of what happened to China. It happened with Brazil as well, with that in terms of the region, maybe just from a practical sense and for like everyday citizen made even less sense because of course it's the closest partner. This idea that Milei was saying, I'm going to cut ties with everyone who is not, I don't know. And well, once again, we go back to what does that mean when you actually come to power? What does that mean practically? Like, are you able to, like, in terms of the economy, forego the most important trading partners? Well, of course, you are not. And another very important point that you were making is the Argentina has a great amount of debt. It's one of the most indebted countries with the IMF. For example, the largest amount of debt is for Argentina. Again, one of the largest. Argentinians are very used to saying that Messi and the Pope and things, and people need to start saying that the highest inflation and the highest debt with the IMF, that debt also conditioned the relationship with China, for example, as in terms of China being one of the countries that could aid Argentina in terms of its financial struggle. So cutting ties in that context was not as easy as it could be said in a social network TikTok. And that is where the swap with China came into place. And that is when Milei ended up traveling and trying to make peace and play nice. Just before we round up, I wanted to ask you, Tianchen, what does something like the Milei phenomenon mean in a world like scenario from a Chinese perspective? How are you looking at that phenomenon?
I heard there is an old saying in Argentina. It says that everything changes in a day, nothing changes in years. I feel like Milei rises against this kind of backdrop, and it's a part of a bigger trend of Latin American and even across the globe, because we have seen some unconventional politicians came into power because they are trying to they vow to dismantle the current situation, and that's how resonating with some of the demographics, especially the younger generation. It's not unique in Latin America. We also see that in North America. We also see that in Europe. We also see that in some Asian countries. So this right-wing movement is kind of across the continent, across the globe. As a Chinese, I naturally stand on the left, so I tend to take a left-wing perspective. But when it comes to reality, I do understand the context of countries like Argentina, because the left-wing parties have not implemented what we so-called like textbook leftist policies. What we see in Argentina, from my readings, the left-wing party, they are trying to carry out like some welfare programs which goes way beyond the public finance can possibly sustain. And similarly, like the right-wings, the left-wing parties also borrowed from the IMF, from the World Bank, from the United States, with the price being opening up of the home markets and the sale of the state-owned assets. And we also see the corruptions under the left, the same as the right. So for the everyday Argentinian, the consequences looks all the same. It's always the public assets, the public interest is appropriated by private interest and foreign power, and we keep seeing the constant falling of people's standard of living. So I can totally understand people's mindset. The whole leftist idea is being stigmatized. So that's why people get so much anger and so much frustrating here. That's why they try to seek for someone like Milei. Looks like they find some solution, find some alternative to the traditional, to the conventional political system. But I think they will find out at the end, Milei is nothing new. Milei is just like everyone else. It's always about how the special interest group wins, about people like Milei and people surrounding him, people like him wins. But it's always every day Argentina's lose. I think people will understand that in the end. But before people realize that point, it might be, as you said, it might be a lot of struggling going on, and maybe we may see more economic hardship, maybe more social division is already on the way. Chinese observer, we are kind of concerned about everything happened in Argentina. That's why I'm so curious to ask you, like, well, how is Argentina people doing right now? And we will definitely keep an eye on Argentina, and I think it would set an example to other countries in the world. And also, if Argentina and China can build some kind of relations, no matter it's in trade, in finance, or in infrastructure, or in some high technology industry, or in digital economy, whatever, it's going to set a new example for South countries. It's going to offer a new paradigm for other countries in the world. It will bring up like fresh air to today's these mainstream diplomatic relations, because if you want to deal with America, it's always either friend or foe, it's either black or white, it's either on the table or on the menu. But if you are dealing with China, it's a win-win situation, and it's going to be mutually beneficial, and it's going to be friend or potential friend, and it's going to be what we call community of common destiny for mankind. That's my main takeaway.
It's always nice, that phrase of community of common destiny. So Tian, it's been such a pleasure to discuss all these ideas with you. It gives us great perspective to be able to share what is happening here, and also try to zoom out and think, how is this coming across from the other side of the world? So I think that was a great conversation. I, of course, want to thank you again. Thank you for joining us here in Overlap, and I hope to continue talking soon.
Sure. Thank you so much, Valen.